Now that I've covered the basics of metaphysics and philosophical psychology, we're able to directly address alcoholism. A very important idea in recovery is the issue of problem and solution. That alcohol is not a problem, but a solution of a problem that exists inside the alcoholic. That the alcoholic must look inward to confront the problem. Mere sobriety is not enough for recovery, for if you take alcohol away from the alcoholic, the problem subsists, and in order for recovery to be successful, it must genuinely solve the problem. Once the problem is solved, the alcohol has no need for a drug or a drink. I would like to investigate the problem from a philosophical perspective. What I am about to say is probably the most important part of this paper. Everything I said about metaphysics was so you could understand psychology, and everything I have said about psychology was so I can explain the disease from a philosophical perspective. And if the disease is so defined, it will determine how we understand recovery. Now, man is a complex animal. He has various faculties that make up his soul, as I have mentioned above: intellect, will, passions, imagination, etc. And these various powers can act in harmony or they cannot. One intelligible human good, an end to which we are hardwired, which I didn't mention previously, an end to which we are hardwired is called integrity. What I mean by that is not character, but integration. Man is ordered to seek integration in the various parts of himself. He is ordered to seek internal order and unity, to seek unity between his character and his actions, and to seek order between his emotions and his reason. If you act contrary to what you know is right, if your reason points you in one direction and your emotions go in another contrary in another direction, you are divided eternally. Someone divided internally can have no peace, nor can he meet his final end. As I have mentioned, there are three properties of being: the transcendentals, truth, beauty, and goodness. But there is another transcendental attribute of being which Aristotle talked about, which is unity. Something exists only inasmuch as it is one, and the more unified it is, the more it participates in existence. Therefore, being is not static. It is not true that something exists or it doesn't. Being is something that you can participate in more or less. This is especially true of human beings with freedom. Therefore, when someone achieves integrity and order within himself, he exists more fully. He expands his essence and becomes more a man. He becomes more himself. If you recall in the natural law, there is the most fundamental inclination that man preserve his being according to his nature, that he live and he live as a man, that he flees from what assaults his nature. The good of integrity is part of the most fundamental inclination of man. Every other precept of the natural law are founded on this one, that man preserve his essence in his existence. Through the lens of integrity, we can come to a deeper understanding of addiction. We know that alcohol is not the problem, but the solution to the problem that is inside. Alcohol is therapy, it is medicine. In order for recovery to work, we must genuinely solve the problem of the alcoholic. When someone ingests a drug, they say to themselves, now everything is okay inside of me, or what is wrong inside of me is made right, or something along those lines. In other words, alcohol affects a sensation of integrity. When you hand over the powers of your soul to a foreign agent, that agent unifies the faculties and creates the sensation of unity and order. If you give the power of your mind over to a foreign agent, the natural conclusion of this is powerlessness. So it is not the inebriation per se that the alcoholic seeks. It is the sensation of internal order. In my opinion, this explains the nature of progression. For if the alcoholic merely drank for the inebriation, there would be no progression. For excluding tolerance, the inebriation is always the same. But because alcohol is doing violence to the faculties, they are desensitized to integrity, like how loud music desensitizes hearing. So over time, one needs more and more alcohol to achieve the sensation of integrity. This idea of integrity is emphasized by the experience of many addicts for whom the drug stops working. When the addict reaches a point where they ingest a drug and feel the inebriation, but the drug stops working as a solution. This is because the drug has lost power to affect this sensation of integrity. There is a cruel irony in addiction, for although the addict seeks integrity through alcohol, he destroys integrity through his very seeking. Genuine integrity involves the powers of the soul being ordered by reason, but alcohol corrupts reason. When one makes their final end a sensation, they divide themselves, for our end can only be known through the intellect. Recall that order is understood as means finding their ends. If a man makes the end of his life a sensation, his life and his soul will be ordered toward that sensation, though in reality it causes disorder for the lower faculties that were meant to serve the higher. The lower faculties find their ends in the operation of the higher. This is why selfishness always fails, because man is ontologically incomplete. We are made for God. In pursuing an end within himself, he's trying to take from himself something that he does not have. Now that we understand the solution, we can understand the problem that alcohol solves. Lack of integrity, a divided self. This is the spiritual malady. There can be no peace within a divided self. The divided man is restless and irritable and discontent. He is dominated by emotions of fear and desire. He cannot achieve the end he was made for, and if happiness results in man attaining his final end, the divided man cannot be happy. This is why alcohol is so powerful in the life of the addict, why it is so hard for the addict to let go, why he will do so much destruction in his life before he wants to quit. Because through the pursuit of alcohol, the addict feels as though he's fulfilling one of his most natural inclinations, that he is achieving an end hardwired by the natural law. The problem in the life of the alcoholic is internal disorder. Then the solution must infect genuine integrity. As I have said, integrity involves unity between character and action, and order between emotions and intellect. One must do what one knows is right, and one must do that despite his emotions. Genuine integrity is only effected through the practice of the four cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Therefore, the 12 steps, if the 12 steps are to solve the problem of the addict, they must have some relationship to the four cardinal virtues. It is from this perspective that I will analyze the steps of the rest of the paper. Although integrity is an end, when looked at from a higher perspective, it is also a means. The purpose of integrity is so we can encounter God, and ultimately we can only find true integrity with God. Through some of the intelligible goods previously mentioned are not necessary for finding God, like marriage or friendship. One can be a chaste hermit and find God. Integrity, however, is absolutely necessary to find God. As I have mentioned, God is encountered through the intellect and will. If man's higher faculties are dominated by the lower, if there is disorder in the soul, he cannot find God. He is blocked. The emotions do not know the end, So if your life is run by emotions, you will miss your end. You will not find God. The ultimate order of the human person is this: the emotions ordered to reason, and the intellect and will ordered to God. Recall that when someone ingests a drug, they say to themselves in one form or another, now everything is okay inside of me. A problem has been solved. However, in allowing drugs to order the soul, the addict loses order, because order only comes as the consequence of the action of an intellect. Drugs do not have an intellect, and they cannot create genuine order. Now, when the addict achieves internal order and submits to external order, to God, then he can now honestly say, now everything is okay inside of me. When everything is okay inside of me, you experience serenity. When everything is okay inside, your problem has been solved, and you have no need for a drink. Now I would like to explain obsession from a philosophical perspective. Recall that the soul has lower and higher faculties, and the motion of the soul can occur from the bottom up or from the top down. Obsession originates in the soul as the result of the lower of the as the effect of the higher faculties on the lower, and the explicit action of it. Okay, I should say that again. Obsession originates in the soul as the result of the effects of the higher faculties on the lower, and the explicit action of obsession occurs from the effects of the lower faculties on the higher. We will first consider obsession explicitly. And by when I say originates in the higher faculties, I mean, if you recall, error enters into the soul through the intellect. Drug use begins with bad judgment. Once the intellect and will pursue drugs, they habituate the lower faculties to drug use, and in the lower end, the faculties, and in the end, the lower faculties dominate the higher. The circumstances of the soul in which obsession originates are twofold. The addict knows drugs is bad and needs to stop, and there is a habit of alcohol use within his soul. By habit, I mean that through repeated action, the faculties are well disposed to their objects, meaning that the soul moves easily when the object of alcohol is presented to it. And the strength of the habit occurs in proportion to the vehement of the action. So, because of the intensity of the pleasure that accompanies the use of drugs and alcohol, the habit is very powerful. Obsession is defined as a persistent thought that does not respond to reason. So, there are two components of obsession that need explanation: that reason is bound, and that there is a fixation of the thought. Both these components are needed to make obsession so debilitating. If it were merely a persistent thought, one could think rationally about it. And if it were merely an irrational thought, one would not necessarily have to act on it. We have irrational thoughts all the time that we don't act on. First, the addict knows he needs to quit. But one day, the image of the needle enters his imagination. What happens? First, the cogitative power is habituated to asserting usefulness to the thought of drugs, and adds the aspect of usefulness to the image of the needle. Since the passions, emotions are moved by the imagination, the image that has been distorted by the cogitative faculty inclines to the object. Once the appetite is inclined towards the image of the needle, the feeling of desire is merged with that image. The cogitative power can move the emotions through the imagination. The converse is also the case. When an object of passion arises in the imagination, the motion of the passion becomes part of the phantasm, and as a result, the cogitative power makes an assessment of the phantasm based on the passion's effect on the phantasm. The result of this is that the image of the needle is distorted away from the truth. Recall that the action of the intellect is dependent on the phantasm, that the intellect abstracts from the phantasm, and that it converts back to the phantasm to make sure the judgment is correct. If the phantasm is distorted, then the operation of judgment is bound. And because the will is moved by the object presented to it by the intellect, if reason is bound, this will affect volition. Though the truth of the matter is that the needle should be associated with death and give rise to aversion, the lower faculties merge the properties of usefulness and delight into the image, and they do so with vehemence. So the intellect is bound in its operation. The process is made more powerful if there is vice in the intellect. So the intellect is weak when it comes to the object of drugs. It needs only little passion to move it. The strength of desire is proportional to the strength of delight. Now, all the powers of the soul are rooted in the soul. The soul can carry out only one operation of the time. So when the soul is intent on one passion, it draws all the faculties to its operation. If there is a strong passion of desire, it draws the soul into the operation of the appetite of the phantasm, which is moving the appetites. Excuse me. If there is a strong passion of desire, it draws the soul to the operation of the appetite, and the phantasm, which is moving the appetites, remains in place. So there is a fixation or a persistent of the image in the imagination. This prevents the intellect from thinking contrary to the image in the phantasm. We have as a consequence of this the thought that cannot be overpowered by another thought. When the object of drugs enters the imagination, the faculties of the soul are dominated. While order in the soul should come from the higher to the lower because the higher faculties are habituated to vice and damage around the object of drugs, they are incapable of freeing the faculties of the soul from the object. A broken wrench cannot fix itself. When all has been said and done about recovery, it is simply a change that has been made in the soul of the addict. Specifically, a change is made where the addict is able to think rationally about a subject he was not incapable of thinking of before. How is this done? If the intellect cannot free itself around the object of its vice, then the solution must be from outside in two ways. First, virtue must be practiced in the life of the addict outside of the issue of addiction. Virtue is a habit congruent with the natural law, and we are obliged to obey the natural law and act according to reason. When one lives according to reason, he puts his passion in order. By ordering one's emotional life to reason and the rest of his life, the consequence of this is healing the faculties around the object of addiction. This is what the steps do. When water rises, it lifts every boat. But it is not enough because of the same principle that a broken wrench cannot fix itself. Man's efforts to obtain virtue alone will be ultimately impotent. In order to make this necessary change, one needs a higher power. How does this higher power act in the soul? I don't know, and it would be arrogant of me to try to explain it. I would just like to re-emphasize that man is ultimately impotent and dependent on God. That the solution is found in integrity. That freedom is found in integrity. That integrity is necessary to encounter God. But ultimately integrity is found in God. And the lower faculties need to be ordered to the higher. Lower faculties need to be ordered to the higher. And that the intellect and will needs to be ordered to God.